little over 8 months ago, I made a purchase of a used Raytech-Shaw faceting machine from eBay. This was after faceting my first stone at my club's workshop, and I had a lot of fun with it. I liked the product that it made. It was nice and sparkly, and I figured it would be a pretty good hobby to have at home with a small one on the way. And with the pandemic kind of shutting things down, it's hard to get out and do stuff. If you've been to my channel before, then you've definitely seen the videos that I make with this machine. Produce a lot of content with it now, a lot of stones in the 8 months. And if you haven't been here before, then welcome. Be sure to like and subscribe the video. Now I did a kind of unboxing / overview of the stuff that I got when I first made this purchase, but at the time I barely knew what I was doing, arguably still don't. But I figured I'd go over kind of my process now and the different parts of the machine, run through what the different things are as you will see them in videos now and in the future. Before we get into the meat and potatoes of the faceting machine, which is kind of this area here, there's a number of accessory parts that come with the machine. Obviously, you'll need a lamp, and this one has up to 100 watt bulb wattage capability. But you definitely don't want to use that strong because you'll just blind yourself when looking at reflections for the polish and all that. I think I have a 40 or 60 watt bulb, although if I turn it off, I think I need to get a new one. It's recommended to use a clear bulb so you can see the incandescent filament on the inside, and that way you are a little bit more likely to see the polish a little easier. Besides the lamp, which has a flexible attachment to position it wherever you want, I generally leave it somewhere around there, maybe a little over there. Get that out of the way. There's a drip tank, which fill with water to whatever desired level you want. And there's a little spigot here that you open counterclockwise or close to control the drip rate onto the lap in order to reduce dust, because you don't want facet dust blowing around your workstation. There's a lot of silicates that we work with, and you don't want silicosis. And I keep a jug of water, a gallon jug of water, and I keep a gallon because it's convenient, but also because there's, from the drip pan, there's a hose that attaches, and I keep it kind of tight, draped over a chair so that I don't get any backups. And that drains into a gallon jug of water from milk. And I also have my splash guard there to anchor it down right now because it's empty. And so that drains, and I know more or less once my gallon jug is empty, then I have to consider emptying my waste tank. Okay, so the machine itself is made in the USA. Mine was probably made in the 90s or so. I'm not exactly sure. The company was bought out in, I don't know, the 2000s at some point, I think. And the guy that owns it now said that he did not receive any records of old machines that were bought. So I have a serial number there, but it doesn't mean anything now. And there's a speed indicator for RPMs. I don't know if this is actually 1-to-1. It probably goes around 1,000 RPMs, maybe a little more. But if I just turn it on a little bit, we're 50 or so. Seems like that's going a lot faster than 50 RPMs. There's a forward and a reverse option. So I have it going forward, which, turn it down so you can actually see it. That's going in a counterclockwise direction, and I leave it at that because that directs the water spray away from me. In addition, with this machine anyway, by going counterclockwise, if I accidentally bump into this or something, all I will do is end up tightening this screw, where I'll turn this off and we'll switch to reverse or clockwise, turn it back on. So now you can see it's going this way. I've had this problem where if I have a lot of pressure on my lap, I probably use too much pressure in some laps, but if I accidentally bump this or keep this from moving, then what we end up doing is unscrewing this and the lap gets looser and looser. And I've actually had that happen where I unscrew the lap enough that it starts to wobble and my stone gets messed up. So that's one of the reasons why I always leave it in the forward mode. Actually, while we're loose here, take this off. So this is just a standard 100 grit disc, which is, a lot of people don't use that course, but I do sometimes. And that lap sits on what's called a platen or platen, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but this is very important that it is perpendicular to the axis of the motor axle, whatever you want to call it. And the motor is, housed in this box, which is solid wood. If you got a model that was made before like the 80s, if it was a 1970s or earlier model, maybe even some of the 80s, I'm not sure when they switched, but a lot of those were actually a composite sort of particle board type wood, whereas this is actually end grain on the wood that's in there. It's not a cover or anything. And I've actually seen an older model for sale on eBay, and the motor is mounted internally with these screws here. And what you'll see is that there's actually, sagging or pulling on that exterior, vinyl facade that they put over the wood. And that's a sign that the motor is actually sagging down, and you'll have to go in and fix it or replace the wood and do all sorts of quality control very soon. So that's something to look out for if you end up buying one of these machines. There's a couple that are for sale now and then. There's a lap sits on the platen here, and you want to make sure that there's no dust or anything on here or grease from fingers. And the splash pan sits down inside there. So that's removable, it's plastic. Have that off to the side. And the splash pan sits on this metal bit here. And it's nice that it protects the motor from being exposed to the water because of that interior guard there. As long as you have a drain that doesn't go, it won't allow it to go above that level when it's sitting like that. Splash pan is adjustable. I'll put it back on there. And we'll switch to a stationary view. Now the splash pan is back on. And let's see, we'll put this is a 180 or 100 grit disc. We couldn't read the label, so I'm not sure exactly what the grit is, but it's pretty coarse. Put that on there, and each knob has two sides. One is sort of concave, and one has a little knob there, and that's for, let's see. So we can just tighten this down with it this direction, or the reason that you would use this other knob side there is if you have toppers, which I use toppers for some laps, for some grits, and I have a master lap, which is plastic, cast plastic or something. And you would need this knob that would go down, and it would then align. It fits in the hole there so that you can't move the topper lap. So actually, let's put this one back on there because I'm going to use this later. And when you're using a topper lap, you can, have it way off center, and you got to kind of feel out where that is on the interior. Once you stop being able to move it around a lot, then it's where it needs to be, centered more or less. Oh, back to what I was going for originally. The splash pan is adjustable up and down. I kind of have it just loose enough where I can shimmy it. And if I'm doing a cut at an angle like this stone is, then I would want the splash pan to go over the lap all the way around like this. But if I was doing the girdle and had my handpiece set at 90 degrees, more or less there, tighten it that way, then I would need to lower the handpiece stand there and put a splash guard on, and I would want my lap to be just below the guard here, or as I like to leave my splash pan as high as possible. So if I have a big stone, then I can leave more gap and have a little bit more splash protection. I try to reduce as much splash that gets out of the pan as possible. But with the small one, I have to have it very close or just under where the splash guard is. This is actually a 3D printed splash guard that a friend gave me, but if you get a Raytech-Shaw, then you would get a metal one if you got it used and they had it anyway. So this is a metal splash pan that nests down a lot further inside the splash pan there, but still, sticks out just an inch or so. It does the same thing. I've started to use the 3D printed one because it's a little bit less hassle, because it only has, a little bit of extra that you have to nest down into there, and it's still very secure. So when you're faceting, the lap cannot be moved up or down. You can move the splash pan, but not the lap itself. That's fixed. So whatever the thickness of the lap is, that top is where the top of the lap always is, if that makes sense. But what you can do is adjust the stand over on this side, or the lily pad, whatever you want to call it. And the stand can be lifted up. Oh, I've never actually done that before. The handpiece sits on a stand that sits inside of a cylinder, and there's almost like ball bearing kind of things that allows it to spin very neatly and very fluidly back and forth. And you adjust this by spinning counterclockwise or clockwise. Counterclockwise will raise it up. See, that's going up. And clockwise will lower it down if you need to get closer and closer to the girdle, for example. So we can go back and forth as much as we want. And once you're faceting and you have contact with the lap, then the handpiece sits on here. Let's see, we'll adjust it close to where I was before. Once your stone is more or less in contact with the lap and you start grinding away, then you just keep pressure on the back of the frog back here and adjust the stone just enough to grind away what you need to grind away for the individual facet. Because I bought this machine used, one of the first things I wanted to do was make sure that the stand was parallel with the lap, because if you're not, then you're never going to get the facets to be where you want them to be. They're always going to be misaligned, or you're always going to have to be cheating them a lot and adjusting angles constantly. And it actually turned out that my stand was a little bit misaligned with the lap. And so what we had to do was I brought it to the guy that I know that has tons of experience with faceting. We adjusted the position of the lap, the orientation, the skewness of it, I guess. Now don't quote me on this, but what I think he did was loosened a screw or two here, and then these recessed screws here are what you use to tighten or loosen sort of the tension on the mounting for this cylinder. And so if we tighten over here, then it pulls the whole thing this way a little bit. If we tighten over on this one, then that pulls the whole thing that way. And you do that with very fine tuning, very small scale adjustments. I think it was maybe a quarter turn that we wound up doing, and that fixed the problem. But in order to do that, you need to use a master lap or a very flat lap. And so I wouldn't use a topper lap for that. He had a really nice flat lap that he used to test it out. I would have to use my plastic lap that sits under this, which is, not the best maybe for that. But now my stone will glide in contact all the way across in uniformity, I guess is one way to put it. And speaking of being level, the other thing you have to watch out for is the levelness of your handpiece, because this can be adjusted as well, where this alignment of the lily pad is a systematic thing that you'd have to change. This is more or less a stone by stone, or if there's some misalignment, then you have to fix that. And so what you would do with that is there are 3 knobs on the main body. These 2 here are for going left to right. If you tighten this one down clockwise, then it pushes this little Teflon nub out further, and so it pushes the whole thing that way. Or you can do the same thing over here and it would push it that way, or if you go counterclockwise, then it would pull this inward and it would go this way. So you can just adjust one knob if you want to. That's usually what I do, is adjust this one and leave this one stationary. And that way I have less to remember, like, oh, I turned this one counterclockwise a quarter turn and this one clockwise a quarter turn. So now I got to turn them back and do all that. I just have to remember what I changed on this one. And they always start at a default value of 0. There's some numbers that are probably hard to read in there, but it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 all the way around counterclockwise. The other knob is for the up and down, I guess is how I would put it, where if we unscrew it and you leave these alone, then the whole thing will drop down that way. And so you change the angle without having to change the protractor angle. Or if you turn it clockwise and push it down so this extends further out, then the whole thing raises up and you have a shallower angle. That can be important for fine tuning star facets or the very last facets of your stone if they're not quite meeting where you want them to. I use this one mostly for the table, the very last stage of polishing that I do. Sometimes that just gets all wonky and you just gotta use that. And the other angles that we would adjust are the protractor for adjusting the angle of where our stone will meet the lap, and then the index gear here, which is a 96 index. You can see this is the 0 point where that is, but it starts at 6. It goes up by 6s all the way around to 90, and then 96/0 is that little peg there. So this has 96 individual recesses that you can lock into place, or you can also move this little lever metal thing over, and that will allow you to freewheel without having to worry about the indexes themselves. And that's good for preforming if you just need to round out a stone or get rid of a lot of material fast. And then the last adjustment is the cheater on this side, which is marked at 0 at this little thicker black line here, and adjust that clockwise or counterclockwise, and that will rotate this whole stone clockwise or counterclockwise depending on what you need it to do. And it's really subtle, so it's hard to show, but if we look at the top here, there's this line. This is the 0 point on the index, or the cheater, and so as I rotate this, you can see this metal part is moving relative to that, and that's because this 96 index is moving this way. If I rotate it clockwise, it's going that way. So if I go counterclockwise, then you can see the whole thing is moving that way. And then the stone is rotated, however many degrees that way. It could be over a degree, I'm not sure. It's good to zero this out before you start a stone so that you're not offset to begin with, because that can screw up after you transfer and all that stuff. Now, my machine came with several laps, which is one of the reasons I got it, is it had pretty much everything I needed right away. And it goes from coarsest to finest as we go up in this stand that my friend 3D printed and gave me. But we got a 100 grit down here, the 100 or 180, whatever that is there, a 360, and it's good to write down the numbers on the back, so if the label wears off like these ones did, then you'll know, because nothing's going to happen to the back outside of where it meets in contact with the platen. And this is where my master lap and the 600 topper is kept, and then here is a 1200 topper, and then my polishing disc, my tin with 50,000 grit diamond goes on top so that no grits or anything fall down on top of it. I don't have room on here and I don't use them, so I don't stash them there, but this came with a phenolic disc, which is also a polishing disc, and so I have used this with cerium oxide for the X cubes that I had a video on recently, and I have a couple more huge ones to play with. And it also came with a 600 grit resin new bond diamond lap. So there's embedded diamonds in a resin, which is good for stones softer than 8 on the hardness scale or so. I also don't use this one that much, so I just kind of have it in storage. It cuts a lot slower than the 600 topper that I have on the machine right now. It leaves a good finish, but it's very slow. If you were to buy a new Raytech-Shaw today, I think there's a bundle kit that you can buy that has similar laps. I think it comes with a 260, 600, maybe a 1200 and a 3000, and maybe a polishing lap. That and all of the stuff, a lot of the accessories that I've shown here come with it, and that runs I think at $2,350. I looked it up like 5 minutes ago, but I already forgot exactly. That's a pretty steep price. This did not cost that much because it was, used. It's cut not hundreds of stones, but over 100 stones. So it's got some wear, but it still had a lot of equipment that I needed at a good price, so I bought it. But if you were to, for example, buy an Ultratech V5, which is kind of the Cadillac of faceting machines, that would give you, the basic instruments and the drip pan. It's not a handpiece style instrument, it's a mast machine, but you get the same basic stuff minus the laps, and all of that would run you, starts at over $5,000, so like $5,280 or something like that, and you'd have to buy the laps separately. And good laps can cost, hundreds of dollars. So and those ones are 8-inch laps, so they're also bigger and cost more than the 6-inch laps of the Raytech-Shaw. The Raytech-Shaw, I think, is a good introductory faceting machine, especially if you get it used at a decent price. There are other handpiece machines, there are other cheaper machines than the V5, but it's those are the two that my friend would recommend as, get a starting machine like this, or just go all in, get the V5, and you'll have a much easier time producing great results as a beginner with the Cadillac of faceting machines, as he called it. Whether you buy new or used, you're going to need dops to put these stones on. And I have, 16 or so. The ones I have come in 3 styles, although there are lots of variations that you can buy for more specialized stones, but these are kind of a catch-all for the majority of stones that one might polish. And those are a flat top, which has, just a flat top to mount something onto. That's a good starter dop for the side that the table will eventually go on, goes down on here, and then you work on the pavilion and then transfer. And then you would transfer to either a round or a V-shaped dop, depending on if you have a culet or a keel. If you use wax, you'll need an alcohol lamp to melt the wax and loosen it after you transfer. And my machine came with a Raytech-Shaw dop transfer jig. You'll need some kind of transfer jig. There's lots of varieties out there at lots of different price points. What I've started to do is the hybrid process, where I would have melted wax and push it down onto the stone to create an imprint, back it off, and then use super glue after using wax. So the wax makes an imprint, and then super glue on the stone, and then put the dop back down onto the stone. So it creates a secure connection between the stone and the wax. And that's a lot easier, I find, nowadays than trying to deal with heating the wax enough to secure to the stone without melting the original wax that I have it setting the stone in place. Because if you heat too much on one side, then the heat transfers to the other part of the stone, and you can loosen it and you can start to get misalignment during transfer. This is my workstation for dopping and undopping and cleaning up stones. So I have a little vial of, this is rubbing alcohol actually. I should probably use, denatured alcohol. But just basic rubbing alcohol for cleaning off stones. It loosens the wax and the glue enough to work with and peel it off with my fingernails for the most part. And I also have Instaset for the super glue. Even though this has, a 20 to 25 second hardening time, sometimes you just need to go faster than that, and a little spritz of this will harden it up in a flash. And obviously a lighter, and I also use an X-Acto knife for peeling away wax when it's soft sometimes, or various miscellaneous uses. It comes in real handy. As with any hobby, there are, of course, incidentals and nice-to-haves. And I've bought a few extra things, or acquired a few extra things over the months. One nice thing is a UV light, which helps show fluorescence in certain stones. So on this On the dop actually right now I have a ruby which fluoresces red under UV light. So that'll tell you something about the components of the whatever you're faceting. I also bought a number of gem boxes to display and hold stones and protect them because there's a cubic zirconia. I originally had them just kind of sitting in a bag, and you don't want to do that for too long because then they'll start to chip and damage each other. And you need facet diagrams. There's a lot of resources out there for free diagrams. The Gemology Project, facetdiagrams.org, I believe it is, as well as the US Faceter Guild are three main ones that I use. I bought this 50-gram scale thinking it would be, more than enough for what I need, 50 gram. So 50 grams is 250 carats. It comes with a calibration weight. And I think I would actually go for a 100-gram scale if I were to get another one, or if I were to do this over again, because for some larger stones or other uses that I have for a scale like this, 100 grams would be a lot nicer to have as an upper limit. I also have I think it's a 5x magnifier headset piece for quick looking at stones in the rougher stages, and for fine tuning and fine polishing, I use a 10x loop. Belomo makes a really nice one. This one is, 14 years old, something like that, and it still works great, even after all the geology trips it's been on. And I also have calipers, which I probably should have gotten plastic calipers now that I know what I'm doing a little more. These are stainless steel, which are nice because they won't, chip or dent or anything, but you have to be real careful because stainless steel will scratch a lot of the softer stones, softer than a hardness of like 7 or so. So it could potentially scratch quartz even depending on how you come at it. And of course, polishing compounds. My machine came with these two larger vials. I think this one is aluminum oxide. It's not labeled, so it's a mystery container, but over here we have cerium oxide, which I use on the phenolic lap, as I mentioned. And I would use this on the phenolic if I were to use it, but I probably won't. But what I use mostly is 50,000 grit diamond, which this was, full when I started faceting my stones. And this is how much I have left still after the, couple dozen stones that I faceted. A little bit goes a long way. I can't remember if that was 9 carats or so of 50,000 grit diamond. It was a decent amount still, but it does go a long way. You don't need a lot with the way that I polish anyway. That's the whirlwind tour of the Raytech-Shaw faceting machine. I think it's a really good introductory machine. There are a couple of downsides. The repeatability isn't super great because, there's no markings on the height here, so if you have to adjust it up for one row of facets and then you come back on the next set, then how will you know how to adjust it down to the level that you want? And so there's a lot more cutting by ear when it no longer goes tick, 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 and it's not hitting the lap anymore, then it's cut down to where you need it to go. So this probably requires a lot more checking of the facets as you go compared to a masked machine, which has more repeatability. Because there's also a few more things to adjust, it can be easy to lose your place and leave something out of alignment, and so your angles won't be quite right. If I were to adjust this or lower this so it was pivoted down a little bit, then I might be cutting at 42 degrees instead of 41 degrees. If I don't fix that before I go to the next stone, then I may be screwing that stone up or starting at a disadvantageous position and have to adjust later or just kind of go with it, and it may not be optimal for light reflectance. And the other thing is it's critical that this is parallel to this, which it wasn't when I first got it, and I would have had cut stones that were cut off kilter if I hadn't realized it or hadn't thought to check that. If you get a new one, it should come parallel and be in good shape, but you never know with shipping and all that. Or if you buy a used one, maybe someone cracked into it or didn't pad it well during shipping something, and it could have gotten askew. I definitely wouldn't be comfortable adjusting something like that on my own without a lot of oversight or without reading up a lot more, because you don't want to screw it up more than it is already. No matter what faceting machine you get, it's always good to have a source of comfort if things start to go wrong. So, why not get yourself a cat? They're good stress relievers, even if they ignore you.